Welcome to our new segment. This is what we like to call Beyond the Facts. I'm Alyssa. I am Cody's wife. I have been helping him behind the scenes with some of his other videos, and we've been talking about how it would be great to have another another series where we can go a little bit beyond just the bare facts and talk about maybe some opinions, our thoughts, how we see the facts connecting to different kinds of things, and maybe some things that are also additional facts but just didn't make it into the original Just the Facts.
A little 6-minute clip.
Yeah, for time reasons.
Yeah.
Or for simplicity. So, welcome to Beyond the Facts. This week we are talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. If you haven't watched the Just the Facts video yet, go ahead and check that out. There'll be a link in the comments below. And let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
So, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. One of the questions that I had when I was reading through your script for the video, proofreading it, was I felt like the facts were presented were pretty vanilla. And so my biggest question was, what are maybe some more controversial facts about her life that maybe you didn't have time to go into or explain?
Yeah, so the biggest reason that she's probably her biggest controversy about her is her stance on abortion. She's vehemently pro-choice, right? And sort of when she was a practicing attorney, it didn't really come up as much. She didn't really deal with that as much. It was more, her emphasis was more on the women's rights. But as she became, a judge and then a justice and a member of the court, she became known as somebody who was strongly advocating pro-choice for women. She ended up writing the majority opinion for a case involving a law in Nebraska around partial birth abortion, where basically the Supreme Court ended up striking down the law because it was overly vague, and it went against the standard set in Roe v. Wade. It could be interpreted that the law went against the standard set in Roe v. Wade, where the state didn't have the ability to limit a woman's access to abortion during the first trimester, and then severely limited ability to limit that access during the second trimester. So they struck it down mostly because of the vagueness of the law and how the law could be interpreted to go against the Roe v. Wade decision. And then later on, she ended up writing the dissenting opinion for a Supreme Court review of a partial birth abortion law passed by the United States Congress as a whole. So I think that was in 2006 or 7 or something like that. So her most controversial opinions are abortion. And then coming in a little bit behind that, just her sort of... some people feel like her approach to gender equality potentially was threatening to the traditional American family and things like that. She was a staunch supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment, which received a lot of criticism back in the day when it was still being debated widely, and things like that. So those are the two main things: is probably her stance on abortion, and then her. Some people felt like her advocacy of women's rights was potentially threatening to the traditional American family.
Okay. And then another thing we were talking about off camera a while ago, you were saying that even though she supported a woman's right to access abortion, and like you just explained, she was a supporter of that, she did not support Roe v. Wade, or how that was passed. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so Roe v. Wade is really interesting because this is not a clip about abortion, but abortion law is complicated and not clear-cut. But basically, Ginsburg's position was that a woman should have access to do with her reproductive rights whatever she wanted, and that the state should have no say, just completely pro-choice, as it were. But she did disagree with Roe v. Wade, and the reason she disagreed with Roe v. Wade was actually more from her view of how the courts should operate. So Roe v. Wade sort of comes out of nowhere and sets a sort of very detailed framework about abortion rights, and it basically flies in the face of state law for almost every state in the U.S., right? And states have to do massive revisions to get their law in compliance with Roe v. Wade. And so her opinion of how the courts should act, she thinks that the courts should engage more in a dialogue with the legislative powers at the federal level or the state level. And she felt like Roe v. Wade actually sort of stepped in front of that democratic process, and the courts just kind of steamrolled through and put their own view on how abortion laws should happen. So even though she's completely unfettered pro-choice, Roe v. Wade, the decision and how it was passed down, didn't really accord with her view of how the Supreme Court should be handing out decisions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I always have a lot of respect for politicians who have respect for the process, I guess you could say, who don't think that their opinion is more important than I hate to say the democratic process, because it's not always the democratic process necessarily. It's the legislative process and the judicial process, but the checks and balances of the government that are set up to keep it functioning well. People who respect that process and work through that process and don't try to push their opinion through executive order if they're the president, or through legislating for the branch on the judiciary, or from stepping around it in other ways, but work through that process to keep the system running and healthy and keep the dialogue open, because that protects everyone. Yeah. At least it was designed to, and it creates more protection than when we go around it in other ways, try to circumvent that process.
Absolutely, yeah.
Another interesting thing you mentioned in the video was that she studied under, let me see if I can get the name right, Vladimir Nabokov.
Yes.
And when you said that, I was like, I know I've heard that name, but I can't place it. Do you want to tell us? And you said that he hugely influenced her writing style. Yes. Do you want to give us some examples of that, or speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, so when she was in college, pursuing her undergrad degree at Cornell, she took literature classes from Nabokov. And for those who don't know, Nabokov was a 20th century novelist. He wrote the novel Lolita, which is very controversial, but critics regularly rank top 5 best novels of the 20th century. And so she says that interacting with him and writing for him and being engaged with that, writing papers for him, helped her to. It really taught her how to use words in a way that painted pictures in people's minds. And so she said it made her very careful about her word choices. She would pick a certain word because of the color that it would evoke in people's minds, or the feeling that it would evoke, and she said that stuck with her throughout her career, and it really influenced her ability, because as a lawyer and as an advocate, you have this case that you're advocating for your client in front of a judge if it's a civil case, and you really have to take the law and take this client's lived experience, and you have to tell a story that's compelling and that says, hey, my client demands justice, right? And you have to evoke something that's not always that's a unique combination of a logical process and an emotional process, and appeal to the legal mind and also the human mind of all the members of the court. And so she really cites those classes with Nabokov as where she learned to write and how to use words to tell that story and to paint that picture and to evoke those colors and the emotions. So that's really cool. I was very surprised when I read that, but also it seems expected, just that such a powerful attorney would come from a place where she had been taught to use words that way.
Yeah, it's amazing the difference that it makes when you're able to paint a picture for someone. I don't have much experience with law, but I have done mock trials on several occasions. And one time we were in a mock trial camp, and I was lead attorney on my team, and there's another lead attorney, and he came up with his closing statement, and he had this beautiful metaphor that he had painted. And everybody, after he sat down after his closing, was like, wow, that was amazing, you're going to win. And then I was able to take that metaphor and use it against him. And anyway, it was all just the color that we gave it that made the difference in the end, because technically we were all matched. And I think a lot of the times in speech and debate too, I've run into this problem where you're having a debate with someone and technically they might have the upper hand. They've got all the details in order and they know all the procedures really well. But when you have that color and that connection to the people you're talking to, that really just puts you over the top in terms of your effectiveness of persuasion and even just communicating the point that you have. So that makes a lot of sense that was able to take her places in her life, learning from such a powerful writer.
Yeah, and for sure it wasn't just, I don't want to paint her in a light as though she's, appealing strictly to the emotions of the people on the bench and stuff. So she was a law professor for about a decade, and her specialty was actually procedure. So she was this total nerd who specialized in teaching procedure, right? It's like the most prosaic aspects of the law, like rules of evidence and like how to file motions and stuff like that. It's like she was an expert, right? She wasn't just somebody who could get up and use flowery words. She had all of the substance and all of the legal backing to ground it. But that ability to use words and to paint pictures in people's minds is really what takes it to the next level.
Yeah, it's what allows you to take that foundation and communicate it well to people, I feel like.
Exactly.
And that's really interesting. I mentioned this before, and the first time you told me that she studied procedure, and I thought it was really interesting because procedure is not just you have to stand here, you have to do this, you have to say this at this time. There is a lot of that, but the reason for all of that and the reason behind all the procedure is protecting people's rights. Like, for example, entering evidence. You can't enter evidence that was gathered by a police officer without a warrant or things like that. And all those things are built up to help protect the innocent and even to protect the guilty from being punished too harshly or from having the jury view them in an unfavorable light and pronounce too harsh a sentence. And so I thought it was really interesting because you said also that her jurisprudence style, the thing that she cared about the most in her, while she was a judge, was I just forgot the phrase. Do you want to remind me the phrase that you used?
Yeah, so she was most concerned about the individual.
The individual, right. Rather than creating staunch, broad, sweeping edicts that would affect a lot of cases. She wanted to make sure that this individual received justice in their case.
Right.
And so I can see kind of that connection there where if she was really passionate about procedure and then also passionate about individuals and the details and the separate details in every case, rather than trying to be like, oh, well, we'll just create this new standard that'll take care of this case and all the other cases so they won't have to come back up to the Supreme Court. But right. she really cared about those individual cases and the minorities and those who didn't necessarily fit the broad sweeping cases.
Yeah. I think part of the reason that she felt that so poignantly was because she lived it, right? She had a lot of lived experience with discrimination. We talked about this in the facts video, but her road to the law was very difficult. You know, like when she went to Harvard, she went to Harvard with a class of 500, and there were 9 women in the whole class. It was like, compare that with today, it's like some 30-ish, maybe 40% of all law students are female, whereas back then that was like 1%.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine that the dean himself coming and saying, "Why are you here taking men's jobs?" Like, man, it just blows my mind. And that people would openly just be like, "No, you're a woman. We don't want to hire you." Even though she was top of her class. Yeah. Graduating from these prestigious universities.
Yep. And I'm sure that memory stuck with her as she was advocating some of these cases later on, because it was exactly that type of thing that really brought her to national attention. Some of her famous cases in the 70s were things like, now I'm drawing a blank on the specifics. But one that's really interesting is actually kind of the opposite that you would think. So in one case, there was a rule for Social Security that, say you were a married woman with a child and your husband died, you would get Social Security benefits because the sort of breadwinner in the home is gone, mm-hmm. and you now need to figure out how to provide for this child, right? But as the law was crafted, if the woman died and the man had to care for the child, the man did not get the same benefits. And so she actually took to court and successfully argued the case that, hey, this is discrimination. This is a violation of the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and ended up winning. I think that particular case didn't go to the Supreme Court. It was a Court of Appeals. It only made it to the Court of Appeals. But